Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Do you remember being 16? Worried about homework, keeping up on the social gossip of who likes who in class, or maybe you were cramming hard for your first driver's test in hopes of getting your license? It's an important stage in anyone's life, but what if there were an additional decision that had to be made during your mid-teens? Like who to vote for in the federal election. The United Kingdom is making a big change, announcing that in their next election, 16 and 17-year-olds will be allowed to cast a ballot. It's not a new idea. Some groups in Canada have been pushing for years to lower the voting age, and countries like Austria, Argentina, Brazil, and Cuba have already lowered it. So if the UK is jumping on board, why shouldn't we? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with Amanda Munday, Executive Director of the organization New Majority, which tries to get young people engaged in the electoral process and fights for youth voting rights. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Does the UK's move to lower its voting age give you hope for what may happen here in Canada?
It gives me a lot of hope about young people having their voices heard. And also, it's a historic win for the UK. And it's nice to get a win, especially when it comes to politics in this country and around the world. So it gives me a lot of hope.
So what would it mean for Canada if we saw the voting age lowered to 16? What would it mean in terms of turnout in your eyes and the electoral process in general?
So first and foremost, we need to show up and prove as a country, as an electorate, that we want to hear young people's voices and we want young people to participate in democracy. And young people, especially all of the people that we talk to across the country, they're no fools. We can't say that we want to hear young people's voices and then not include them in democracy. Young people pay taxes if you're earning over $15,000 a year. You can drive. Young people deeply care about their issues. So it absolutely makes sense that young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, can vote and have their voices heard in democracy. I do think when it comes to turnout, we would absolutely see an increase in youth turnout. We know data is shown from 2015 through to the most recent federal election that youth voting from 18 to 24 has been on the decline. And that's partly due to distrust in institutions. Elections Canada has cited that it's a bit of interest in politics, caring at all about the electoral process. But we also know it's logistical in nature. ID, how to vote, where to vote, what you need, what the process is to vote. So the sooner that we demystify participating in elections, the sooner we make this a welcoming and easy thing to do for the most amount of young people, then we'll absolutely see an increase in the people who are participating.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that Elections Canada data that shows that in the 2021 election, we're still waiting for the 2025 report, but in the 2021 election, only 47% of people aged 18 to 24 cast a ballot. That's less than half. And when you compare that with the older demographic of 64 to 75, it was 75% turnout. So, how do you get around that? Because, the argument is going to be they're not coming out to vote. So why should we lower the voting age when the young people who already have that chance are not even hitting the halfway mark?
I see some real, very basic logistical solutions here. First of all, in Ontario, at least, civics is taught in grade 10. And then you can't vote until you're 18, which is kind of funny, right? We teach young people in grade 10, often when they're about 15 or 16, about the electoral process. But then we say, wait a whole few years before you can actually vote. But you can go and get your driver's license. And you definitely can pay taxes if you have a summer job or a part-time job. But we're not going to have you vote and have your say in political systems. So I can see why young people can learn about politics and then very quickly become disengaged from a process that doesn't include them. We also know, and lots of studies have shown, including Statistics Canada, that when somebody votes, they are much more likely to be a voter for life. So the sooner we start to engage in habit forming behaviors like voting as early as possible, we then know that they are much more likely to participate long term. Why wouldn't we start that at 16 or 17? Why would we wait till 18?
What about the arguments that people make, and it's been made before many times when this issue has popped up, that people may be too immature at the age of 16 or 17 or not engaged enough to in politics or the economy to cast a ballot and make those heavy decisions for the future of the country?
I come back to the driving example a lot because I think it's apt, right? We teach young people all of the rules of the road to get a driver's license permit. We encourage young people who are 16 or 17 to be able to operate a motorized vehicle. And we trust them with the maturity and decision making to be able to do that, but not make decisions about their civic involvement around municipal, provincial, or federal politics, around how their tax dollars are spent, and the issues that directly impact them. The sooner we make it clear that young people do matter in this country and that their voices are heard, the more likely they are to build trust in the system. I actually don't think it's about maturity at all. Plus, have a conversation with a 16 or 17-year-old. Apathy is a myth. They care. Young people deeply care about the issues that are relevant to them. And it's not, I don't think that you would see a dramatic increase in maturity in talking to a deeply engaged and civically engaged 16 or 17-year-old with a 22 or 23 or 27-year-old. Maturity is a spectrum that can really range. It's not age dependent.
More on the big story in just a moment with Amanda Munday, Executive Director of the organization New Majority. We're speaking about the possibility of lowering Canada's voting age to 16. So why do you think there is this hesitation from most political parties and politicians to lower the voting age?
I mean, look, elected officials and candidates focus on the demographics and the constituents who get them elected. And because older generations tend to turn out in larger numbers to vote, if you ask an elected official or a candidate who they're listening to the demographic who voted them in. And so a lot of the times when we have conversations with elected officials or with candidates about listening to youth, it's a real struggle to explain, like, youth voices matter and they will show up at the polls if it's clear to young people that we care about their issues and we care about having their voices represented. But often I feel like elected officials tend to go backwards and they reverse engineer based on focusing on the issues of the people who voted them in, not the people who didn't vote them in. So 16 and 17s aren't always the target for elected officials, but they absolutely should be.
How do you think it would change the way political parties treat policy issues if we had people as young as 16 voting?
This is a really key and interesting question around issues and young people. Young people these days, the Canadians that we talk to through the federal election and across many provincial elections in the past year, don't identify with political parties the way other generations have. So if you talk to a young person, they won't immediately tell you, they're a household liberal or NDP or conservative. They do, however, deeply align to issues. And we know that young people care about affordability, as do many, many people across this country. They also are deeply concerned about climate and mental health. And so when we broaden the younger demographic voting age from 16 and 17, it will force candidates and elected officials to make those issues a major focus for all parties. And to me, that's exactly what we need to get young people to the polls. We need to platform climate issues. We need to address mental health and healthcare and affordability. Those are the issues that young people care about, and they're the issues that are going to bring young people to the polls.
Now, previous legislative attempts, even in recent history, including, I believe it was the NDP's Taylor Bachrach who did it in the last parliament, and then Senator Mary Lou McPhedran as well with a bill before the Senate. They've all failed, obviously, because we haven't lowered our voting age yet. But oftentimes the government says it's simply not a priority of the population to make that kind of change right now, and there are other priorities that they want to focus on. How do you counter that at a time when so much of the focus and attention is on the economy and the existential crisis that we're in right now in our trade war with the U.S., and not so much on just giving more teenagers the right to vote.
To me, this goes way beyond just voting. There's a very active and loud conversation in this country around Canadian sovereignty, around strengthening our Canadian democracy, and around strengthening civic participation. Addressing trade wars, addressing economic challenges, affordability in this country comes back to policy and policy changes. And the more people who participate in democracy, the more voices that are heard, the more the politicians have to listen. To me, they are deeply linked. If we care about strengthening our Canadian sovereignty, about making sure that our democracy is functioning, healthy, and protected, more people need to participate in democracy. They need to take what I call everyday small acts of democracy, talking to your MPs, going to city council meetings, and voting. When people detach from democracy, that's when democracy is at risk. And then we're in a much worse shape for addressing the economy. So they are deeply linked. It's not about, simply talking to teenagers and bringing them into the democratic process. It's about addressing the health of Canadian democracy as a whole and bringing in as many people as possible so that we have strong government and strong opposition.
And there is precedent for this as well, right? Like a large part of our population, the older part of our population, lived through a change like this before. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, and so we initially had voting age at 21, and then we dropped it to 18. In the UK, lowered the voting age only in 1969 from 21 to 18, and then now to 16. So we have precedent in different countries and in Canada to continue to recognize that young people have important voices. As I said, I keep coming back to, if they can pay taxes, if they can drive, if they can participate in other areas of civic life, then it absolutely is their democratic right to be able to vote.
Now, you're not just calling for this change for federal elections, right? You want to see provinces and municipalities do the same. Is that correct?
That's right. We absolutely want to see the voting age lowered for municipal elections and provincially. We just spoke to the BC legislature about the BC provincial government hopefully lowering the voting age to 16. We're huge participants of the Vote 16 movement across Canada. And so absolutely, once we start to introduce voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, that should apply everywhere.
And have you been keeping track of this court challenge that was launched back in 2021 by young people to try and strike down the limitation that we have of 18-year-old voting age?
Yes, I have. So it is, the charter challenge is very interesting because their position is that it's against young people's charter rights, as all citizens have the right to vote in Canada, that by restricting 16 and 17-year-olds' ability to vote, that it's against their charter rights. And so I think it's a really interesting perspective to be able to draw attention to when young people can participate in democracy as they participate in other areas of civic life, that it's their civic right to have their voice heard. And I support 16 and 17-year-olds being able to vote.
Could this court challenge have a broader impact on voting age, given they're arguing every citizen should have a vote?
Yeah, the charter challenge is saying that the 16 and 17-year-old youths who are bringing towards the charter challenge, saying their rights are being infringed. But it would certainly set the precedent that young people should have the right to vote, regardless of age. But specifically, that charter challenge is about I think, 13 individuals who have brought the charter challenge towards the government.
And we'll have to wait and see how that court challenge plays out because it is still before the courts and still ongoing. Amanda, is there anything else that you wanted to get out there before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I would just say that there is a movement in Canada that's growing over years and really starting to gain momentum, which is the Vote 16 movement by, grassroots youth organizing movement in Canada. So, we consider the UK announcement a huge win, and we also really support the Vote 16 movement across Canada. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in this to reach out and follow them. They're doing good work.
Okay, Amanda, thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts on all of this.
Thanks for having me.
That was Amanda Munday, Executive Director of the group New Majority, speaking with me about the possibility of lowering Canada's voting age to 16. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, or you can leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can also find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.